Prepare to get a cosmic backseat education as we talk to Eric Earley of Blitzen Trapper about his new album, Hundreds of Thousands, Millions of Billions, a title that might invoke visions of brightly colored sprinkles to those of us down under, but means something very different to Eric.
It's a phrase that appears in really ancient Buddhist sutras a lot.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a phrase used for all kinds of purposes, but mainly as a way to sort of expand your mind outside of the normal types of numbers we're used to dealing with.
Right.
It's pretty hyperbolic in a certain way, but in other ways it's not. Like I think thinking about those kinds of numbers is really cool. Like the fact that you have 1 trillion living beings inside your guts right now. That's not counting all the beings that live in your eyebrows and your hair and on your skin and in your mouth. And like each human is just like a cosmos unto themselves, you know, and there's billions of humans. So it's a very strange thought to me. And I think that's part of where, I think that's part of why those phrases that I kept reading of that nature just really like jumped out to me.
Right. So have you always been kind of interested in numbers or numerology or math, that kind of thing? Is that something?
I've never really been interested in numerology. I did study math in college, though. I majored in math and minored in physics, and so I was into that. But that was a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you go from majoring in math to making music?
Well, I made music my whole life. I started playing instruments, banjo and guitar, when I was like 5 years old, and I played, and then at a certain point, I decided to go to college, and I'd flunked math many times in high school, and so I decided to try that. And it was sort of just like a personal challenge.
Right.
Is how it started.
Sounds like it.
But then I got really into it. You know, I did really well, and I just kind of kept going.
Right.
But at a certain point, I think I just sort of was like, wait, I don't want to do this. I'm going to play music.
Right.
You know.
All righty. Very good. And that's exactly what's happening here. So my understanding is also, along with the Buddhist texts, there is a box of old tapes from the 90s that have something to do with this record as well.
Yeah, when I was like 19, my dad bought me a 4-track cassette deck, and I started writing songs and recording songs, I guess, which kind of changed my whole life and my whole like way of thinking and doing things. And so I have a collection of tapes in a box, like tons of them,
right,
dating back to like the early 90s all the way up probably into the 2000 and teens maybe. And so, yeah, I was kind of going, I don't have a 4-track machine anymore, but I borrowed one from a friend because they're not around too much anymore. But
that's true.
I borrowed one from a friend and was just kind of going through them and listening and just remembering. Right. And then I was like, oh, that's a good song. Oh, that is too. I'm going to pull some of these sounds. And then I ended up just using that 4-track to record a lot of the newer material on the record as well. Kind of going back to the way that I used to do it when I was a kid.
Right. Well, it sounds great. So you wouldn't know that there's any loss or any kind of change in quality as far as the technology goes. Maybe there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. I mean, I used 4-tracks so much. Like a lot of the earlier Blitzen Trapper records were 4-track records as well.
Right.
And so, yeah, I got really good at using those along with computers as well. So, yeah, it's kind of just a mix-up of all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah. And I've heard the record, and I noticed that on the track called View from Jackson Hill, I think there's some guitars from like 1999 or something. Is that right?
Yeah, that one, there's some old pieces of recordings in that. There's a few of the tunes that have some really old recordings from those 4-track cassettes from, the late 90s.
And so when you're putting this record together, is it kind of you presenting it to the band? Are you working with the band? Is it mostly you and then whatever else they add on? What's the working process like for you these days?
Well, yeah, I write everything, and I always have, and then I sort of arrange things as I record it. And yeah, I'll bring the band in to play stuff. But normally I just kind of have everything. I kind of just figure everything out in the studio. And yeah, a lot of times I'll just have people play on it and see what they do, just kind of let them go.
Right.
And see what happens.
Right. And of course, you've gone through a few personnel changes over the last few years. So
yeah,
how does that affect things? Does it make a difference in your mind when you're in the studio recording and creating? Who else is on board?
Not really. I mean, I I use the guys that have been playing live.
Yep.
And Brian is doing all the drumming, and he's always been in the band. And
Right.
yeah, I kind of just use whoever's around. There's a number of different players doing different things.
Right. And I see you have a tour starting off. You got a show on the 17th, which is on the release day in Portland, and taking it from there. So how does that kind of manifest itself with these new folks?
I mean, the band that I have now, we've been touring the last couple years, so we kind of have our thing down, and it's cool. It's really fun. They're really good players, and we can kind of go wherever we want musically, which is really fun. But yeah, so we'll be playing a few shows in May, and then in July we'll be doing 2 weeks through the country, and then we'll have another tour in November actually, out east.
Because I see you have a kind of a forum on your website, Tour to Blitzen, where some of your fans are kind of adjusting to the new lineup, especially as far as the live shows that they've seen, and kind of discussing among themselves how it's working out, how it's changed, they seem to be pretty open to change, though. You seem to have some good fans there.
Yeah, I haven't really heard anything about it, to be honest, here and there. But I mean, that's the thing, is like all the old albums, I was doing all the instruments and writing everything.
Right.
And so, yeah, at the shows, the band was really just playing the parts that I created. And so there was this illusion of a band, but really I was kind of the one that was always doing everything. Right. In terms of the writing and arranging. So musically, it's not like a huge change for me. It's kind of just like having players that are, I think the most important thing is that we're all friends and everybody wants to be out there, right, on the road. So, yeah, that's kind of what matters.
Right. I see most recently released Planetarium as a single with an animated video that goes along with it. Do you have anything you want to tell us about it? Either the video or the song?
I've been living like a ghost inside myself upon a shelf on a distant planet, a crooked house that never sleeps. And this river that unwinds within my spine records the time. 1,000 ripples racing from a pebble's fall, while a lone coyote walks upon a highway running south, drifting up into my mouth, a silent hemisphere.
Oh yeah, that's a super fun song. I had Eric Johnson play on it from Fruit Bats.
Right.
And then Anna Tivol plays the violin on it, which she came in to sing in the studio, but she had her violin with her, and then we were like, oh yeah, let's just record you on this song. And she just like laid down, I think it was 1 take or 2 takes. She just laid down this incredible like violin part to the song. I don't think she really even knew the song. She just kind of heard it a few times and then played. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. And then I did like a video for it where I did an animation, a cartoon basically, which I'd never really done before. I've done a lot of drawing and art and stuff, but that one was fun. It was like a couple thousand drawings, and yeah, it's just like this morphing, changing study on impermanence, I guess.
How long did it take you to do
really
that
fun.
With all those drawings? You must have patience.
A couple months.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah, it took a while.
I don't see how I wouldn't be able to do that. I'm a video editor by trade, but I like to cut. Drawing frame by frame would drive me nuts.
Yeah. It's pretty tedious, honestly, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. Right. Just got to accept that it's going to take a while.
Right. And did you have like an idea at the beginning of how you wanted it to look, or did you kind of let it kind of reveal itself to you?
Yeah, I kind of let it reveal itself. I had already done a bunch of animation that I had been messing around with, and so I kind of pulled from that, and then I would let that sort of guide where I went with it. But I kind of had the general idea of what I wanted the vibe to be. Right. But yeah, in a certain sense, I just kind of let it go. Follow the thread.
Now, speaking of videos and vibes, Cosmic Backseat Education is very different than what Planetarium, as far as, especially the video. It's pretty entertaining.
Oh yeah,
full on. What brought that about? Your Mr. Rogers meets Kill Bill kind of thing going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, that was so. Our drummer Brian does a lot of film and video. So him and his buddy Michael, who is a filmmaker, they got together and came up with that treatment.
Right.
And so yeah, we made that down in Eugene. It was super fun to make.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was this crazy idea that we just kind of envisioned, and we tried to make it happen.
You like putting these things together because it looks like it was a lot of work to make that thing.
It was, yeah, it was a lot of work. It was definitely some time and energy went into that thing. But yeah, it's always fun. I mean, when you get a bunch of people involved on a project, it's always cool to see what comes out the other side, you know?
Right. And the song itself, my understanding is kind of inspired by memories of yourself in the backseat of a car listening to the radio. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that song is just sort of a weird riddle in a way, but yeah, sort of the seed for it is like, yeah, remembering being a kid and like laying in the backseat and hearing the music on the radio, and just sort of like closing your eyes like it's at nighttime, you know, and like just kind of getting lost in the sounds, and for me, just like that was always a good escape.
Do you remember any?
You know, in America we drive so much.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, in America we drive so much, so a lot of people's memories and lives stem from like being in cars, you know.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Was there any particular song that you remember from that time that kind of made your ears perk up or stayed as a bug in your head?
Oh man, I don't know. There's a lot. I mean, when I was a really little kid, my dad would listen to John Denver a lot in our VW bus that we had.
Right.
And then also Crosby, Stills and Nash a lot too, you know. And then like other random weird 8-tracks and things like that. I don't know.
Right. Well, speaking of John Denver, some of your music on this record has a kind of pastoral feel about it. Little Rocky Mountain High thing going on, maybe like Dear God and the Green Rising. It kind of felt that way to me.
The Dead God of the Green Rising. Oh yeah. It has like very finger picking kind of thing going on. Yeah. I wanted a lot of the songs to like kind of move and have their own like energy pushing them forward.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of those where it just kind of just keeps moving and changing.
And you spent much time thinking about the running order of the songs? How
I didn't come up with the running order. D. James Goodwin, who mixed it, he did the running order. Like he mixed it and then sent it to me, and he's like, "I like this order. What do you think?" And I was like, "Yeah, great. Let's do that."
That's easy.
So I didn't decide at all. I listened to his order and I was like, "I think this is perfect." So yeah.
Right. Well, it's nice to be able to delegate a few things because.
Oh yeah.
It sounds like you did quite a bit of it of the actual creation yourself. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you play it back for other than the band members? Obviously, are there people that you, once you've started on something, kind of get their feedback and decide if you're heading in the right direction, or you kind of on your own?
Not really. I mean, I play it for like the people that are going to be, you know, like the guys that are playing the record. And then, yeah, I don't really. I kind of like to, lately I like to just sort of record and then I'll leave it for a little while and then come back to it so that I can get sort of more a fresh take on it. But I really don't, like all the music of mine that I like the most is always the stuff that was actually pretty insular. Like I worked on it, didn't really have a lot of outside influence, and just kind of like let the stuff in my mind palace like become reality, you know? I think for me, that's kind of like my best way of working.
Right. So lyrically, I mean, there's some pretty heavy stuff going on throughout these songs, and you can tell that you've been checking out the Buddhist texts and meditations and things like that. So do you think about how your fans, your audience is going to relate to that, and do you expect them to spend time and kind of pore over these things?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that there's sort of more just like a vibe and feeling that is important in music, so that the lyrics and the images involved mesh with the actual sonic things that are happening. And so that's the most important thing for me. I mean, a lot of the stories are vague, or like occulted, you know, they're like kind of hidden and almost kind of riddles as well, which I like that a lot because it allows people's minds to sort of like try to crack it open or create their own meanings around it.
Yeah.
And I think that because I think that because we all have a shared consciousness, like I think that people can get at the meaning in different ways from different directions. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the way that I imagine people listening to it. But to be honest, like I write all of it for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And these days, everybody's, when you do gigs, there's a lot of interaction. People are at the merch table, and you have a lot of time to spend usually talking to people. Do they like to kind of unload on you what how these songs feel to them and make them react?
Yeah. I mean, we haven't done any shows doing these new songs. But yeah, in the past, people definitely have wanted to discuss what the songs mean, or really more like what a song means to them is really kind of what people like to discuss, which I'm always interested in hearing, So, yeah, I always like it when people want to like talk about songs and stuff. That's great.
So you've got a song that's about like two vampires on Cheap Fantastical Takedown, but also Upon the Chain is much more factual, if I'm not mistaken. It's something to do with your uncle Tommy. Is that right? So.
Yeah, that song is like kind of more of like a classic narrative. Well, not really. It's definitely still riddles, but yeah, it's about a much more straightforward story in a sense. But I mean, I think the whole idea of Upon the Chain is about like this sort of cycles of behavior that we kind of like go through, live through, in this incarnation, and sort of becoming aware of those cycles and I think oftentimes, most people are like addicted to those cycles, and you just remain on that chain, and you're just a link in that chain that just keeps sort of repeating. And my uncle was definitely one of those types who just couldn't jump off of that cycle, and he suffered for it, and he definitely had a crazy life because of it.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the riddle that's seeded that song.
Did you know him, or was he kind of before your time?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and in the song, like I talk about seeing him in LA, like hanging with him in LA when I was a child, and he was like the iconic vision of like the 60s ex-con or whatever, like the yellow teeth, long hair and beard, stained shirt, like always had a cigarette, was always into something shady,
Right.
Living in East LA,
It sounds like there's a bit of romanticizing about it in your mind. Is there? The way you talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, to a point, but he was pretty awful, and he also disappeared when he disappeared. Like
right.
When I was probably a teenager is the last time we ever heard from him.
Right.
He would surface occasionally, like the cops would come to our door looking for him or something like that. But yeah, he's become more of a mythical figure in our family.
When you describe it, I just have in my mind scenes from Easy Rider or something.
Yeah, totally.
And how does this record kind of relate to Holy Smokes Future Jokes, the previous record? Is there a continuum, do you think?
Yeah, in a certain sense. I mean, Holy Smokes was definitely like all the songs were about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the
right.
Bardo Thadol, and so I was really into that, but I didn't really know anything about Buddhist texts or the practices. I was just sort of getting into it because it was so psychedelic and bizarre, and I liked all this. I liked the narrative that unfolded in that teaching, and
right.
So I think that the thread is that I sort of just kind of kept going down that rabbit hole, and started to sort of understand what it was actually saying after a while,
Right. Yeah.
And so a lot of these songs are kind of me like being like, oh, that's actually what they're talking about, And so it definitely is sort of like a companion piece to that one, for me anyway.
Right. And speaking of psychedelics, that leads us, a lot of folks are trying psychedelic drugs and hallucinogens and things like that. Is that something that you're interested in, that you've dabbled in?
Oh yeah, I did psychedelic drugs a lot in the past, and had good and bad results, like anything. Yeah, I don't really do them anymore. Occasionally, but like for me, they seem to be at the place I'm in now. They seem to be sort of just like either you use them as like a way to just like get your rocks off, or if you're using psychedelics for enlightenment, they seem to be sort of like a shortcut that doesn't actually work in the end.
Right.
So, like for me, I'm more interested in meditation practices and like the jhana and the vajrayana practices, and I've gotten more into the Tibetan side of it too, like dharani and mantra practices as well. And I think that stuff is the real deal. Like that's the legitimate way
Right.
to those states and to those spaces.
So do you meditate daily?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. Twice a day. Yeah.
And even when you're on the road, do you think you'll be doing that?
Oh yeah, I'm sure I will. Like I do certain Tibetan rites, and I also do certain mantra, and I do just straight up old school Buddhist meditation, what's called dhyana.
Right.
And it's really peaceful and it's enjoyable, and I think that it expands your awareness of all the people around you and beings, and I think it gives you the ability to have more compassion for other people, especially for someone like me who spent most of their life being very selfish and kind of unaware of things, being sort of more beast-like, you know.
Right.
Whereas I feel like it sort of, that practice just opens me up more, and I think it's healthy.
And do you think folks who listen to your music will kind of, is that part of why you do it, to kind of help them through that journey as well?
Maybe. I don't know if I could necessarily help anybody, but like, I think for me, it's always like music's always like my journal, you know. It's like,
right.
This is what I'm into. This is what the thread that I'm following. And so if others want to follow me there, that's cool, you know. And like, I'll talk to you about it. You can listen to the songs, and we can chat, you know, about that stuff as much as you want to.
Gotcha. So do you have like a desert island disc or an artist that you couldn't live without that made a major change in your life?
Oh man, that's always the hardest question.
It's got to save it for last.
I know. I feel like, I mean, if I'm completely honest,
please
myself,
be.
The band that I've loved the most in my life, not necessarily as much now as I did,
right,
but all through my growing up years, the band REM, Michael Stipe's lyrics were my favorite.
Okay.
Like I mean, hands down, anybody who grew up with me would be like, oh yeah, he loves REM. That's his band. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think a lot of it was his lyrics were like riddles. They were difficult to comprehend, but they made you feel and think certain things, and you didn't really know why. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was a very sort of subconscious way of approaching lyrics, and it always appealed to me, and it still does. And I think my favorite lyrics are always those lyrics that are something you kind of have to unravel and work at, you know?
Right. And did you get a chance to see them before they fell apart?
Yeah. We played a festival in Florida back in like 2009, maybe.
Yeah.
And they were headlining it.
Nice.
Yeah, so we got to see them. It was really cool. And then we actually played with Peter Buck and Mike Mills at a South by one time. I performed with them. We did a Big Star cover.
Oh, nice.
With those guys and with like the Posies guys as well. And then one of the drummer for Big Star, he was drumming. It was really cool. We got to play.
Jody Stevens, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So Jody was drumming. And then Buck and
nice.
Yeah, they were all playing too. It was really cool. It was kind of like a crazy moment for me, just being like, these are my heroes, and I'm on stage playing with them, you know?
That's all right. Yeah, that's cool. So I don't think have you ever played down in this part of the world? I couldn't find any record of you having been in New Zealand.
Never in New Zealand. The closest we've come is Australia, but that was a long time ago.
Right.
Many years.
All right. So is that a possibility these days? It's a long way down here. I know.
I don't know. It just depends on if you can afford to go down there, you know?
Right. Yeah.
That's always the question.
All righty.
All
right. Well, thank you very much for spending this time talking to me, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with this record, and hopefully your record release show on the 17th is a success. You're playing at a place called the Aladdin Theater. It sounds good. Sounds like the perfect place for you guys.
Yeah, it should be a good show. I can't wait.